Hey guys, so welcome back to the channel. So let's briefly talk about the Busan International Film Festival 2021. And of course, this year, as similar to last year, it's been very muted because of Cerveza. And it still, though, runs. Even when there was that big political crisis where they wanted to shut it down, yes, because of even politics, yeah, because there was even the Seoul ferry disaster got involved with the Busan International Film Festival, as in politicians getting revenge on each other because they did not like a documentary on the Seoul ferry, so they were basically like accusing each other of embezzlement, trying to like bash. Even then, the film festival went on, and I remember I was so curious back then. I think it was like, what, 2015 or 16, or was it 2017? It was like the year after they did the documentary, so the revenge had to happen the year after. And I was wondering, like, I wonder, you know, whether it would be good. And the films itself, they were so good. So the film festival itself, in terms of like whether they choose great films, they always choose such wonderful films, and they really do. I don't think they really announce it. They don't really like go off and say like this year's theme is going. They don't do it. You really have to watch the films, but you do get a sense of what the zeitgeist is. And I think that's the coolest part of the Busan International Film Festival. I think it really does show you what the world is thinking right now at the moment through the lens of the filmmakers. You know, filmmakers are part of the artistic community, and of course artists are always a bit ahead of the times because they see what's going on in society, and then they put it through their work, and they give us a heads up of what's going on. So, you know, like all you economics people, like you try to go to Davos to try to get like a crystal ball on what's going to go on in the world. Well, I like to go to the Busan International Film Festival every October to see, in my crystal ball, what people are going to do, because more than an economic, you know, P&L report, the people mess it up. Right? That's what I've always seen. You give me a balance sheet? Yeah, let me see who's holding the balance sheet. And the group that is either just ignoring the balance sheet, manipulating the balance sheet, tearing up the balance sheet, don't even know how to read a balance sheet, then I think you get a better sense of what's going on. So anyhow, like, I mean, I have to admit, you know, I've been in Korea for a long time, and when I first went to the Busan International Film Festival, I think for like the first 3 years, I didn't watch any films. I just went to all like the parties, because the parties were popping back then, because they were really focused on trying to make it like the Cannes Film Festival of Asia, and they were really focused on celebrity and events and drawing in high-powered people and also good films. And so the events were the big thing. And so, you know, I got to go to, you know, some private events, and let's just say, I'm not going to name drop, but it was so cool. And then after a while, I started watching the films, and then the party scene started to die down, and then I noticed that there was something kind of magical with the way that the movie started to kind of coalesce around a particular feeling. I noticed it as a feeling, then I said like, oh, a theme, then kind of like a zeitgeist, and then sort of like a prediction of where society was going. You know, my background is sociology, so I was just like, oh wow, this is a gift. This is kind of like, you know, getting a whole sense of the answers without reading the book. And so I don't know exactly when, but you know, like when Piana came out, that era seemed like that was when the film festival is talking about, like, there are major gaps in our social system, and look at the bottom of society. They're crying out for help, they're struggling. So you saw like movies about like the underclass really suffering, the people who are being forgotten by the social system. So I remember like a movie about in Colombia, a single father and his son trying to make it, and then he sent his son to live with a university professor, and they showed like, you know, it was like the haves and have-nots, and then he couldn't really handle being there with the rich kids, and then he went back to his family, and you got to see the two different worlds. Like they had to do like a shared kitchen with all these other families in like a boarding house versus, you know, this wonderful house with like a pool and stuff. And so they're showing like these two worlds and economies just like not beginning to operate well, and how these people were just having to suffer. Then the next year you saw the suffering people who are being screwed by the system kind of all like getting back at the system. So I remember there was one movie where also, I think this was in Brazil or Argentina, it was about like a apartment complex that was gonna be taken over by an evil corporation, and they were evicting everybody except one woman who did not want to leave, and she was holding up the whole development project. So they purposely put termites in the building so that there was no saving the building, right? And it was all about, you know, how this apartment was like a cultural and historical and family, like, you know, base. And they finally discovered that this evil corporation had planted termites in like one of the upper units, because they were just like, no matter what they offered, no matter what kind of negotiations, this woman would not leave the apartment. She was the last one in there, and she got so mad. In the last scene was she went to the corporate office with like a rollaway bag, and they were like, oh, what are you doing here? Like, oh, you know, like, do you want to sign the contract or something? And they're in the conference room. And then she's like, oh, yeah. And they're like, oh, what's in that bag? And she opens the bag, and it's literally like one of those like termite hives. And she brings it out, and she just throws it onto the conference room. So it's basically like then the underclass sort of like getting back their power at the system. Then the next year, it seemed like the theme started to move about like the underclass realized that they are also part of the system, and now they're fighting against each other. Like, yeah, you realize that you have to figure out, like, you have to, yes, complain about the unfairness, but you're also part of the system too. And I remember there was this one movie about a social worker who had to take care of another, and this was a Korean movie, somebody who was disabled. And, you know, so she was poor because she was just a social worker, and he was poor because he was getting these subsidized services, and they were both, you know, poor, and they both felt they were being kind of fallen through the cracks of the social system. And so they also like had nobody to talk about, and they were just so frustrated with each other, but they had to sort of try to get along, but they were both essentially also part of the system. And the last scene was like, I think the lights went out or something, there was a blackout, the electricity went off, and then they were just fighting with each other. Like they were just so, you know, like when you just get so fed up and just tired and hungry, just fighting with each other. So I think that was also kind of like a message of like, you know, we all have to take part. And now this year, I think, is a very poignant theme, revelation. Now if you've noticed, like what I've said, it's basically all kind of a reaction towards a system, right? A system that still operates but is sort of failing. This year, what I've noticed with the movies, people have given up on the system. They basically think like, I'm not going to give a second thought to the system. Screw the system. The system doesn't work. And so that is what I've noticed with the two movies I saw, and the third movie I almost saw, but I read the description and I think it fits exactly through. So I'll give you a review of it because it's more fresh in my mind. But essentially, what I saw from the characters and then from the Q&A talkbacks from the director that we did over Zoom, which was kind of cool, was that the characters gave up on the system, and so they're still in a very unjust world. And since they can't rely on the laws and the system to give them fairness, they're all trying to navigate individual choices that are complex. And so now we're seeing, what do you have to do as an individual to get your own sense of justice that is comfortable for you outside of the legal system, justice system, any other kind of social structure or system? If you can't depend on, if it's a school, the principal's office, if it's at work, the HR department, any kind of system where you've kind of given up on, how do you as an individual choose a path that would give you a sense of peace? Or do you even know what you're doing when you decide to choose a particular path, or are passive about it? So that was the cool thing about, I think, the films that I've seen, and then just scanning through some of the descriptions of the other movies, it seemed like that is the world that we are living in right now. And again, to bring it back to Squid Games, I think that's where the world is. That's why it's resonating, because the social systems are failing us. And so people are now looking at it like, I gotta play this game outside of the structure, because we've all given up on the structure. Yes, we're still bound by laws, we're still bound by things like money and social customs, but we are not relying on it as much, I believe, as we did before. We're not putting at least our hearts in it as much as before. We're not putting our feelings of like, well, that's where we're gonna get a sense of value as much as we did before. So the first movie that I saw was called The Bargain, and it was set in Shanghai, China. And essentially it was about a small business owner, a man who recently divorced, and he's running a tourism company that's not doing well because especially of the pandemic. He tries to sell it. The buyers aren't buying it. They're just like, look, dude, this is not gonna work out. This is not working. And he employs a lot of these drivers for the tour buses who come from the countryside, and they see him as like some kind of rich Shanghainese guy, but he's just struggling, right? And so one of these guys, you're probably not going to watch this movie, right? So spoiler alert. So one of these, and this is basically a big spoiler alert because basically we find this out at the way end, but one of these drivers is essentially terminally ill, but he hides it. And he pretends that he just died on the job so that he can get some sort of like money from the company. And so it's a little bit vague on like how the laws or customs work in Shanghai, China. But essentially with the story, it works out so that like the company is on the hook because he basically went to sleep, I guess, inside the bus, and then he made sure that he just died in the bus. And then so the company had to pay out, and then that basically made the company fold. It made the company go bankrupt, and then the wife, before that all happened, went to the strip mall where like the offices were located and did a big show, and turns out that she was basically in on the con, because later on they got some evidence that he was terminally ill, but they had not known that. So basically this sets up this unfair situation, because people were a little bit suspicious of like, you know, what was going on. But essentially the way that the filmmaker positioned this from the beginning, like the thought in the head of there's no way to rely on the traditional systems of justice, is that like this situation, first of all, didn't it was kind of outside the insurance. It didn't somehow, like, it fell out of that purview because his paperwork wasn't there, and it sort of fell out of the whole kind of legal system because they were trying to settle, and he was like from the countryside, so that they were kind of doing it in kind of like a talk style. And so they gave them money, which they couldn't afford, but they gave them the money. And so the father was sort of kind of like a pushover, so his sense of like dealing with justice was basically to be passive. And so his ex-wife hated that. That's why she divorced him, because he was just too nice throughout just life. And the reason why also they're saying that you know the filmmaker kind of dropped the hint of not being able to trust systems was that they brought up like military service, how like if you serve in the military, it's all about connections, and that's why, you know, my son had to leave the military and became a driver for your dad. And so the son of the tour company is also a main character in the movie, and he is interacting with another guy who is related to the guy who conned his father. So the son of the passive owner, is like now also on a quest to find his justice as well, and he takes more of like an investigation role. He's trying to figure out, and so long story short, his sense of justice is sort of like he confronts once he finds out the truth. So he is like trying to go on a truth finding mission, and once he figures out the truth, for him, confrontation and just speaking it and saying like, is this blood money worth it? You know, just saying it is enough for him. To that other guy that he was working with, who was a nephew of the family that did the main con, he couldn't handle it. So then he went and ended, you know, his auntie's existence. And so for him, his sense of justice was that. So you saw like these people all take different routes that had nothing to do with the actual system, because they did not rely on it. So I thought that was very interesting. The second movie, so that was called The Bargain. The second movie was called Uni, and this was set in Indonesia, and it was about arranged marriages under Islamic law. And so there was this young girl who was a high school senior, and I guess she was like, you know, a pretty girl, looked smart, everybody wanted to marry her. And it was kind of weird. I mean, not to make a cultural judgment, but that was the judgment that the filmmaker was also making, was that the old man who wanted to make this high school senior his second wife thought nothing was weird about it when she was so struggling, saying like, how can I be comfortable with wanting to be married off to a guy that I barely know, and he's basically like kind of like the swimming teacher, and he came to the family, and I think he was the second person to ask, and then I guess there's like some sort of superstition that you shouldn't turn down the second marriage proposal, otherwise you'll never get married. So there's like this added pressure that she should become like the second wife of like a really old man, like I guess he was like 60 years old. And when she confronts him, or like when he confronts her, at school, I guess after swim class, she was like, I don't think I'm the right person for you. And he's like, why? What's wrong? Is the dowry not is it not dowry? It's basically like he has to give them money, give the family some money. And he's like, is it not enough? Like, I can give you more money. Like, it was like kind of a straight face, as in like, there's like, this is so normal, and actually, right, if it's not enough money, then I could give you more money. And she was just so like kind of frustrated. And so the way that she was trying to figure out the whole movie was trying to like find ways to skirt around it. So she was able to skirt around that issue by saying that she was not 100% pure anymore, and he made an assumption like, oh my god, were you assaulted or something? And so she was able to get out of that one. But then she witnessed her, and of course this is all fiction, so we shouldn't like judge a whole culture and a whole country and a whole religion. And so she witnessed her math teacher at the market putting on like a sari, so he was like enjoying cross-dressing or something, and then he was threatening her, and then he went to go ask for her hand in marriage to her parents, and then I guess to basically censor her. And so she had to try to find a way out of that. And so like there was like a sense of injustice there. And she also had like a boyfriend that was her age, and that they were in love, and they were trying to figure out how to deal with all of that. And so there was no way to appeal, because she was saying like there's no way that she could talk to her family about it. So that family social system, that was out. She had to find a way outside of that system. Obviously, outside of her religious system, she couldn't go there. School system, she couldn't go there. There was no system that she could go to for a sense to resolve this issue. And even when they were showing other girls get married who felt like there was such a sense of injustice, when some people said that there was one couple where there were guys who purposely threatened couples like in date spots, to threaten them, saying like, oh, we're going to report you and accuse you of doing improper activity, and accuse you to the authorities and put shame on you unless you give us money. And so again, there was like manipulation of the system there. And so people all trying to find ways around the system, and that girl decided to just get married because she said that she wasn't as brave as the main character, who said that she was just going to stand up for herself. But in the end, this girl as well just decided to escape the system by running away from her marriage day and going into the river or the ocean. We don't know exactly like what the ending was, but that was the last image. So that was how she escaped it. And then the other movie that I saw the plot points for was a movie, I think it was also based in China, and is called Increasing Echo. And it was where a wife had to then deal with her husband's mistress who went to a nursing home for dementia. And so then she had to interact with the mistress and see, like, make the choice, revenge or not. And so again, outside the normal systems of justice, and you have to make these individual choices on your own because it just doesn't either fit into the normal systems or the systems have failed. So people are just bypassing and just saying, no, thank you, or it just doesn't work. And it's not as if, like, just because you're bypassing it, it's just easy to make that decision. You're suddenly faced with, like, oh, well, without a system, these choices are actually really tough. And I think that's where we're at. And I think that is what these filmmakers are showing us, is that, yep, we can say, like, yep, screw the system. But once you do, the choices that you do have to make on your own are really, really tough. And thank goodness we can see how these characters are making them in different societies all across the world, under numerous conditions, under numerous scenarios. And I think that is the beauty of this year's Busan International Film Festival. So if you still have some time to go down to Busan, if you're still in Korea, go see some of these movies, because if you are ever in a similar situation and you need to make some of these choices, at least you've seen somebody else make a choice. And who knows, maybe it'll save your butt one day. All right, guys, we'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.